In the 1800s, no one ruffled feathers quite like Hawaii's Princess Kaiulani. This island rose made history for her scandalous romances and daredevil attitude, but most of all, for her mysterious final days. When Princess Miriam Likelike gave birth to a little girl in Honolulu in 1875, everyone knew she'd be destined for great things. Kaiulani's father was a Scotsman, Archibald Cleghorn. He wanted to name his daughter Victoria, after his own queen. Her mother, meanwhile, had other ideas. She gave her baby girl middle names that meant highest rank, and so high up as to be lost in sight. However, her second name had the most important and tragic meaning of all. Her mother named her Kaiulani after her sister, who'd passed away at a young age. The birth of the princess was anything but a private affair. Gun salutes announced her arrival, churches rang their bells to mark the happy day, and everyone rejoiced that the little princess was born. If you think this sounds like even more fanfare than usual, you're right. Both the king and his successor were childless, making Princess Kaiulani the heir to the throne. She was Princess Likelike's only daughter, but her dad, on the other hand, was a bit more eventful. He had 3 other daughters from a previous relationship with another Hawaiian woman. Princess Kaiulani had 3 half-sisters who were born out of wedlock. Now, Kaiulani had a fancy godmother who didn't think standard gifts and presents, like a candle, would cut it, so she bestowed her young ward with several acres of land, some miles away from Honolulu. Kaiulani's family moved to her beautiful estate when she was 3. This is where the princess spent an idyllic childhood, surfing, swimming, and horseback riding. Well, until her happy days came to an end. Not all was hunky-dory in Kaiulani's world. Her parents were very different people, and they often got into fights over their many disagreements. Archibald was a typical Victorian gentleman, brought up to be lord of the house, family, and staff. Likelike was Hawaiian nobility, also brought up to rule. However, her parents' squabbles weren't going to be an issue for too long, as Kaiulani would sadly realize. Being a princess is no guarantee of happiness. Kaiulani unfortunately learned this lesson at a very young age. The first time she faced tragedy was at the age of 6, when her beloved godmother passed away. But that was just the start of a life filled with heartbreaks. The next loss that the princess had to face was much closer to home. Kaiulani's family and friends all doted on her, but she loved her mom the most. That's why it was especially difficult for 11-year-old Kaiulani to cope when her mother became terribly sick. The doctors insisted that whatever ailed Princess Likelike could be cured with proper nourishment and a good diet. In a heartbreaking turn of events, however, they were wrong. While on her sickbed, Princess Miriam Likelike asked to see her beloved only child. When she arrived, Miriam revealed that she had a prophecy to share. She seemed convinced that her daughter would leave the island for a long time, never marry, and never ascend to the throne. Tragically, all of her predictions were bound to come true. Before she was even 12 years old, Kaiulani lost her mother. Princess Miriam never recovered from her mysterious illness and ultimately passed on February 2nd, 1887. She was only 36, and to this day, no one knows exactly what caused the princess's strange and sudden decline. But according to legends, foul play was involved. Some sources say that she was cursed or targeted by black magic. Miriam had been a vivacious and gracious host while she had lived. She always had guests coming and going, and that included the author Robert Stevenson. He became a great source of support for young Kaiulani, often telling her stories of Celtic warrior queens and writing poems in her honor. However, some wondered if Stevenson had more on his mind than just friendship. Kaiulani was just 13 when an almost 40-year-old Stevenson took an interest in her future, leading some commentators to raise their eyebrows. Some have called it a platonic affair, others wondered if the two shared a dicey romance, and still more say that Stevenson just had a weird crush on a preteen girl. No matter which version is true, we definitely know this: Stevenson was the first of many guys to become a little obsessed with Princess Kaiulani. She was unique in being the first half-Western heir to the Hawaiian throne. Her father had strong opinions on what sort of education his daughter, who would one day become queen, should receive. He did not think it was enough to hire tutors to give her a European education in Hawaii, and wanted to send her to Europe to learn how to be a queen according to Victorian standards. Now, the Hawaiians wanted to make sure that the foreigners who seemed so interested in their island knew that they were a proud, capable kingdom with as much culture as any European nation. Indeed, in some ways it seemed the Hawaiians were more advanced. Their palace received electricity before the White House did, with Kaiulani herself turning on the lights. Now, although she wasn't happy about it, Kaiulani agreed to go to Europe, along with her older half-sister, Annie. She studied privately at Great Harrowden Hall in England and excelled at Latin, math, literature, and history. Keeping up with the athletic side of her nature, she also played tennis and cricket, and took lessons in German and French. Hawaii might have done really well under such an accomplished queen, but alas, it wasn't meant to be. Kaiulani's life changed enormously once she stepped away from the island. She was still royalty, but she was also an international student. Originally sent to study abroad for a year, she soon realized that she would be away in this strange country for much longer. You see, back home, a dangerous uprising was underway. Back home, Kaiulani's uncle, King Kalakaua, was in the middle of a huge catastrophe. He had signed the Bayonet Constitution a couple years ago, which diluted his powers and gave more control to the Euro-Americans on the island. This decision didn't just doom the king. In time, it would also change the course of Princess Kaiulani's life. The first blow hit Kaiulani when she heard that her uncle, the king, had passed in San Francisco. This news was both tragic and mysterious. Just a few months ago, Kaiulani had received a letter from her uncle. In it, he begged her to be on her, quote, guard against certain enemies, quote, that he couldn't name. Was it one of those enemies that had a hand in his demise? Nobody knows. However, the loss of her uncle meant that Kaiulani's aunt was queen now. It seemed like it was only a matter of time before Kaiulani herself would take the throne. Now, Kaiulani was absolutely hounded by rumors. After all, she was a young girl living away from her family in the glamorous world of Europe. Naturally, her name started being linked to several men. One of her possible suitors was especially scandalous. It belonged to a definitely not royal beau, the humble son of Kaiulani's chaperone, Clive Davis. When Kaiulani's father heard about this rumor, he denied it categorically. Unfortunately, that didn't seem to do much good. As soon as he shut down one piece of gossip about his daughter's love life, another popped up. People started to whisper that Kaiulani had ended her fling with Clive and was now seeing her ex-boyfriend's brother, George. And it didn't stop there. Many people wondered if Kaiulani was secretly involved with her cousin, the handsome Prince David Kauananakoa. If she was, her family would be thrilled. Kaiulani's own aunt had already tried to set the two up. According to some records, Kaiulani and her cousin David may have actually been the real deal. Multiple newspapers published announcements that the cousins were betrothed. However, when he heard about the notices, David denied the entire thing. Today, most historians insist that the cousins didn't feel that way about each other. However, that might not be the whole story. Someone very close to the prince has suggested that he may have had more feelings for Kaiulani than he let on. According to the woman that the prince eventually married, he may have carried a torch for Kaiulani even if she didn't return his feelings. His wife even stated that he would never have married her if Kaiulani had lived. Now, Kaiulani was no different from other young girls her age. She enjoyed meeting new people and supposedly had plenty of suitors. She even wrote to her aunt about rejecting a German count. However, she realized that she could not marry at will and lamented to a friend that she'd been, quote, born under an unlucky star, quote, because she couldn't live as she wished. Unfortunately, things did not seem to be looking up for Kaiulani. She tried to focus on completing her studies and learning how to conduct herself as future queen when she received terrible news. Her aunt, the Queen of Hawaii, had been forced to step down from the throne. Suddenly, it looked as if everything Kaiulani had been working for would be snatched away from her. Who was behind this turn of events? A group of European American businessmen backed by the US Marines and government. Their aim was to rid Hawaii of monarchy and make it an American state. Kaiulani had been away from Hawaii for 4 years at this point. The plan was for her to return the next year and assist the queen in running the kingdom. However, she now found herself torn between staying in Europe and rushing back to fight for Hawaii. In the end, she surprised everyone by sailing to New York on a mission. She would try to persuade the American government to rethink their plans and let Hawaii stay independent. Kaiulani was only 17 when her life turned upside down. At an age when she should have been studying and socializing, she realized she had a duty to try and regain Hawaii's independence from the Americans. She delivered an emotionally charged speech in New York, where she declared, quote, I, a poor, weak girl, with not one of my people near me, have the strength to stand up for the rights of my people, quote. The American press had not expected a princess with Kaiulani's charm and passion. She became very popular in the United States, and one newspaper even described her as a flower of civilization. President Grover Cleveland and his wife met with Kaiulani and sympathized with her cause. Cleveland withdrew the Treaty of Annexation and initiated an investigation of the overthrow. Kaiulani had succeeded in at least making the Americans realize that the situation was not as black and white as they might have thought. There were quite a few people who suggested that it would be better to allow Kaiulani to wear the crown instead of her aunt. Even some of the leaders in the provisional government in Hawaii figured it could be a more tactful way of gaining power if they allowed her on the throne and controlled it by assisting her in managing the kingdom's affairs until she reached maturity. This was impossible. However, Kaiulani would never have dreamed of stepping over her aunt to ascend the throne. Kaiulani went back to Europe following her visit to the United States. She spent some time with Davis and his family, and then made her way to Germany with his daughter. She enjoyed those days by all accounts, spending time learning the language, making friends, and also earning admiration from young German officers. Looking back, it's a good thing she had fun while she could. Kaiulani began to feel Hawaii and its troubled politics were far away, and she started getting more and more used to life in Europe. So much so that she convinced her father to live abroad with her instead of going back to Hawaii. Father and daughter spent time in Scotland, England, the French Riviera, and Paris. This may sound glamorous, however, her financial situation turned out to be precarious. As heir apparent, Kaiulani received a stipend from the Hawaiian government until her aunt's overthrow. Unfortunately, after that, the stipend stopped coming in, and her father's financial status wasn't looking pretty either. She wondered if she could ask the American government to support her, but realized that would mean she had accepted that they had overpowered Hawaii. Kaiulani refused to do this, so she held her head high and pinched those pennies. Sadly, the princess's financial strain wasn't the only thing going wrong in her life. During her last 2 years in Europe, Kaiulani began to suffer from multiple health issues. These included weight loss, migraines, flu-like symptoms, and eye problems. She would frequently faint as well. Had she developed an undiagnosed thyroid problem? There's no way to be sure, although it does seem like she had thyroid issues when she returned to Hawaii. In 1897, when Kaiulani and her father were in Europe, they received the heartbreaking news that her dearest sister, Annie, had passed. Kaiulani was devastated, especially since she had not seen her sister since she had left Europe several years ago. Whether it was because she felt that there was no joy left in staying there now, or because she wanted to go back before she lost anyone else she loved, Kaiulani decided to leave Europe once and for all. She left Europe in October 1897. She went to Washington, D.C. first to meet her aunt, the Queen, who was protesting against the annexation there. Then she went to San Francisco and finally set sail for Honolulu in November. The American press and people fell in love with her all over again, especially since she shattered their stereotype of a barbarian princess. Hawaii could have stayed independent, but unfortunately, the new president, William McKinley, made sure that didn't happen. He used the Spanish-American War to his advantage, pressuring Hawaii to welcome American troops onto their land during the conflict. Kaiulani's father had no problem with this idea, but Kaiulani herself, she felt disgusted by the idea. She hated the way things had changed in Hawaii. It mortified her to see Honolulu was decked up for US forces, and when the Hawaiian flag was lowered and replaced by the US flag, she said the sight was, quote, bitterer than death, quote. Neither she nor her aunt went to the annexation ceremony, preferring to stay at home dressed in funeral robes as a protest against Hawaii becoming part of the US. Several other natives and royals also boycotted the events. While life was very different from what it might have been, Kaiulani still tried to live as well as she could. She went to stay at her childhood friend Eva Parker's estate for her marriage. The festivities lasted several days as Christmas and New Year celebrations also became part of it. Tragically, all these festivities would have a heartbreaking end. Even though she was a princess, Kaiulani was a tomboy at heart. She loved the outdoors and never missed an opportunity to ride a horse. So when some guests went out for a picnic, of course she joined them. However, her expedition had a terrible consequence. During the outing, a windy rainstorm struck the party. Kaiulani rode home as fast as she could, but she couldn't escape the stormy weather. That day, Kaiulani had refused to wear a coat or jacket to keep her warm, and the rainstorm took its toll. Once Kaiulani's father heard about his daughter's condition, he sailed to see her with a doctor in tow. After 2 weeks of intensive treatment, the weakened princess returned home. However, she wouldn't stay there for long. Kaiulani passed of inflammatory rheumatism on March 6, 1889. At the time, she was just 23 years old. If you enjoyed this Factinate video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more incredible stories. Want a say in who we cover next? Join our membership program through the link in the description for exclusive perks. Your support means everything to us. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.